We are live now. Yeah. Hey, good evening, everyone. So, thank you so much for joining Speciale Talks. I know there are a lot of talks happening today. Thank you for taking your time and joining the session. Without any further delay, I like to welcome our founding partner Arjun Rao of Special Invest. Over to you, Arjun. Please take. It's the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Dhanush. Good evening, everyone. Super excited to be here today and bringing to you episode number 2 of SpecialeTalks, a series of discussions that we have with early stage entrepreneurs talking about variety of startup sectors and domains that we are excited about and that we think has a very bright future at Special Invest. Right, just to give you a quick 2-minute background about Special Invest. We're an early stage seed fund focused on deep software and hardware ideas. We invest up to $500,000, going up to $1 million sometimes in companies in the very, very early stage, idea, concept, and MVP, right? In people building technologies and businesses of the future, right? On the software side, we enable companies building AI, machine learning, technologies, cloud infrastructure, developer tools, which is what we're talking about today. And wherever founders have unique technical insights, we are excited to partner with them in the very early stage. We also do a bunch of industrial and enterprise hardware investments in space technology, robotics, and the works, again, things and areas of disruption that we think are going to change the world in the next decade or so, right? So with that introduction, welcome once again to everyone to Speciale Talks episode 2. Today's topic that we are discussing is the rise of developer tools, right? This is a fascinating, area of innovation, and particularly in the SaaS domain where a lot of work is happening over the last few years. A lot of exciting companies are getting built globally, right? And we're seeing a new wave of these companies being built out of India as well, right? Basically, we're understanding that the developer audience globally is core to the technology industry, and the productivity and the ability to enable developers to do their job better with a lot more efficiency is of utmost importance. A slew of software and SaaS companies have come up in the last half a decade that enable software developers to do their job better, faster, cheaper, right? And that's what we're going to talk about. We have today on the panel for this discussion three very young and dynamic founders building amazing products out of India for the global audience. Right? We have Sanket Saurabh, co-founder at Deep Source Technologies, right? SaaS platform that enables you to automate code reviews with static analysis. I'll let him talk a little more about it. We have Ankush, co-founder at Decoder, that's building coding platform, IDE for mobile development, which is very exciting. Right, it's unimaginable a few years ago for me to think somebody could be coding on the mobile. I think they're making it happen. So curious to hear a lot more about that. And Lakshman, who's co-founder at Yaoi, which is short for yet another online editor, which they're building developer workspaces in the browser that enable you to work with any sort of software remotely through the browser. Again, enabling remote work for developers, very sophisticated fashion. Super excited to hear about that as well, right? All of these guys have started their companies in the last 2 to 3 years, right? And are very deep. All of these founders are very deep into the developer ecosystem, understand the evolution of today's developer ecosystem and the needs of the developers, and they're solving very specific problems there, right? So, very warm welcome to all three of you. Thank you for being here this afternoon and this evening. Maybe I'll start off, and go around the block and ask each of you to kind of give a small introduction about yourself, a background, a 2 to 3 minute introduction of what you guys are building at your startup, and a little genesis of this as well. That would be a good start. Okay, we can start with you.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone, and thanks for having me here. Thanks a lot, Arjun. At Deep Source, we're building an automated code review tool for developers that helps them write better code. You can think of it like Grammarly, but for software developers. So the core problem that we're trying to solve is, when you're writing code, when developers write code, they don't have access to sophisticated tools when they're writing code. Like in the software development workflow, further down the line, everything has been mostly automated and standardized. You have CI, you have CD, you have automated SCA and whatnot. But the place where people still write code, it's still 100% manual, and developers spend a lot of time waiting for code reviews and have to do everything manually. And that is the problem that we are trying to solve using technologies like static analysis, machine learning, inferences, and so on. And that's pretty much what Deep Source does. Yeah. And we are a small company, 22 people so far right now, distributed across India mostly, and in the US. And yeah, it's 2 years in, and many more to go.
Lovely, Sanket. Thanks for that introduction. Very exciting to see the problem that you're solving. We've observed you over the last couple of years, and congratulations on the early progress and best wishes for the future. Right, Ankush, over to you. Share what the Decoder team is up to.
Yeah, thanks, Arjun, first of all, to get us all over here. Uh, so, my name is Ankush, and I'm co-founder at Decoders, which is a mobile-first coding platform for coders around the world to code on the go, anywhere, anytime. We support 40 plus frameworks and programming languages. So, diminishing diminishing the gap between a desktop and mobile. So you can now create Node.js, Python, uh, Django, all kind of software projects from your mobile itself. Uh, we have over 2 million registered users coming out from 170 plus countries. So basically, it's everywhere around the world. And two distinct type of users that we see on the platforms are one very young age, sort of entering into digital technology, college engineering students starting to learning to code, creating their first codes. They they are sort of utilizing the platform as their first way of coding. So one of the insight is that's where the behavior can be changed quite easily because there's no set of reference point for them. They are the first time coders. So if they have to code on mobile and it's sufficient way to code, they can do that. And it's easier to mold their behavior. And on the other side, we also have developers and freelancers. So the use cases for them becomes a little different. For them, it becomes assistive and it plays into their laziness. So they want to write code on the go while lying on the sofa. They want to make some couple of edits and push it from the mobile. They won't have to go and just pick up their laptop for that. So those are the two major kind of use cases that we see happening on the platform, and it's built around the community. So our community can share codes with each other, uh, help each other, answering questions, solving each other's bugs. So these are the things that we are doing on mobile.
Lovely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Again, painting the picture of what can be possible and how to make developers lazier, if I may say so.
Yeah.
Right? But the effectively, that is about being more efficient. Right? So that's exciting. Lakshman, right? I know you probably don't directly call yourself a dev tools startup. I don't know how you refer to what you're building at Yaoi. So maybe you can throw some light on what you're building at Yaoi and how do you see your company in this ecosystem.
Yeah. We're not completely a dental company, but that's our legacy. That's where we came from. So with Yaoi, we are building a platform that basically enables running any desktop application on the browser. Now, the caveat over there is the application is actually not running on the browser, but is running on remote servers, and the application is streamed to the users in real time. So we've taken the browser as the single gateway of distribution because like internet and browser are more or less replaceable, and we wanted to basically solve the problem of hardware limitations that everyone has in terms of their PCs or work PCs, in terms of CPU, memory, or storage, and make it truly elastic and cloud based, and support any and all apps. Currently, we are in private beta. We support a couple of dev tools, a couple of design tools, as well as the browser itself. Surprisingly, there's been like a weird interest in the browser itself being used as a replacement to the VPN, and like a bunch of other use cases that some of our early access users have been trying the platform for over the last few weeks. But yeah, the problems that we started to solve for were very developer specific, which was the suboptimal way of creating your developer workspaces in terms of setting up the environment, downloading, say, whatever framework packages are required, and in a team that is always repetitive. And apart from that, the meme of it only works on my machine, even though it's funny, but it's increasingly frustrating for developers when it comes to practice in work environment. So we wanted to abstract all of it away to the cloud, and by way of doing that, have no limitations on the hardware or the workspace, as well as the moment you bring anything to the cloud, collaboration comes baked in. So those were the origins, and to a great extent, the current platform still holds all of those at the core.
Wonderful. I think we've just also just tried to start using been invited to the private beta and started to see what it can do and how it can be used. So super excited to see how the platform plays out and how it can get democratized to everybody. Thank you so much, Lakshman, for sharing that. Maybe I'll start with a little background for all of you to kind of share your insights and thoughts on what has happened in these last few years, right? Because of which there has been such a slew of companies that are focused on building SaaS tools for developers, right? What do you think has changed, right, from let's say a decade ago to the last 3 to 5 years, right? There are a bunch of unicorns in this domain, right? There are API based tools. There is, like I think Sanket mentioned at the beginning, there are for CI/CD, there is for testing, then there is for better IDE for development itself, right? And then there is for deployment. There's just so many things. Any thoughts from each of you saying what has changed in the last few years because that has enabled this trend to come through? Lakshman, you want to start, or Ankush, you want to start?
Yeah, I guess one thing that's happened is there is a place for developers to hang out, and this is Slack or a bunch of subreddits or Twitter. And in the late 80s and early 90s, there was a similar revolution around software, which is the free and open source software by Stallman, where more or less every quote unquote developer in the basement was writing code, which was a utility. But the strong sense of community, which was sort of a movement, came together and started structuring it in a way which is consumable across other developers and their work. And I guess that's changed a lot over the past decade, where developers have started sharing their problems or their sets of problems, whether professionally or personally, the tools that they use, the solutions that they have, and by way of that, like earlier, it was all on IRC, but IRC, because it's been dying over the last 2 decades, now all of that has moved to Twitter, Slack, subreddit, and you see a lot of really good products come out of these discussions, right? And I guess that's been one of the things that's changed over the last decade or so. The other is there was this notion that dev tools don't pay or don't make money, And it was true to a certain degree, like maybe 10 and a half years ago. But what's happened is people have started thinking of value as time as value, right? Or time is the currency. Now, if you use a tool which saves time, right, there is a value that you can associate with it, and people have started paying for it. I guess that's the core for Sanket's product or Ankush's product or even my product, where people collectively have started to associate uh, currency and time as equivalent in the community. And with that, you can create businesses, you can create an ecosystem which people use. So I guess these are the two things which, for me, have primarily changed. Of course, there's been a bunch of other changes by the big tech companies, FANG companies, in leading the movement to this stage. But the core of it for me is these two big things.
Very interesting thought of time as a currency and how that has become more and more valuable in these last few years. And therefore, all these companies are therefore able to monetize and monetize very well, right? Ankush, your thoughts on this? What have you observed and what have you seen as a genesis to where you are today?
Yeah, I think I would agree with Lakshman on productivity side. Most of the dev tools solve for productivity on one way or another, either by reducing the time or by reducing the number of developers needed to build or reach a solution. I think one another change that we are seeing everywhere is coding has become new math today. It's basically digitization is everywhere. Be it your mom and pop shop, a business, each sort of business is going through some sort of digitization. Maybe just example of Khata book, Microsoft Excel. Each business use them, and there are huge technologies behind them. So we see each business interacting with some sort of technology or coding, which is enabled itself by coding and dev tools. How do we continue coping up with this huge demand of technology that we are generating every day, where the number of developers are limited, and 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 developers, the way they are paid, they have become precious commodities for us. So in that case, we only have two choices: either we make them more efficient by increasing their productivity, decreasing time to go to market for products, what they build, or another approach, which is DevTools itself. What we see with DevTools is we make them productive, the existing audience that is there. One interesting another approach to solve the same problem that we are seeing happening with is low code and no code tools that coming out into the market. How they tackle this problem is by actually going and increasing the number of developers, because they're bringing barrier to coding this lower, that now everyone with some sort of technical literacy has done has done engineering, but now working in sales job or marketing job, can still build applications. So they are creating more developers, if we can call them developers. I'm not sure, there's huge debate about it. People call them citizen developers, people call them there are different names, but if we consider them to be developers, uh, that's also one way we are seeing how this segment is all growing all of a sudden, because the huge demand is already there from technology and digitization side. I think another way to look at it is also, as Lakshman said, 5-10 years ago, there was not much investment into the domain. This all changed because of mainly GitHub's $7 billion acquisition with Microsoft, and then more and more dev tools companies like Atlassian and Twilio going open and doing IPOs, so, and having multi-billion-dollar valuations. That has also given a lot more confidence to this market, and more founders are now open to build startups in this domain, because they know the investments will be there, the market is there, and they can solve a particular niche problem which exists. I think those are my take on why people are building on dev tools.
No, very well mentioned. I think both the basically you're saying the billions of applications that need to be built. We don't have enough developers, so let's make the developers more efficient for sure, and let's give them tools right, to make it super easy and make other people also developers.
Yeah.
Right? Whether we call them developers or not is up to debate.
That's
Right?
up for debate. Yeah.
Fair enough. But okay, but I do acknowledge the fact, particularly from the investor community, that those big wins of companies that were built and exits that happened, right, the unicorns and decacons, right, has given us the confidence to go on and invest in early stage companies. I think all of you here in this panel have raised early capital, right, which may be for the ideas that you have and maybe would have been tricky a few years ago, right? So that's validation from our side, and we are super excited as well. Sanket, coming to you, I think Ankush and Lakshman talked about a couple of things. Particularly, I think Ankush brought up the point of GitHub and code repository and these sorts of things. And you guys build on top of that, right? That enable testing and enable code quality management, right? What have you observed, right, in terms of the open source community, right? And the open source developer base being an enabler for you to build your product as well as for you to distribute your product. Sanket, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah. So I have a slightly different take here. This is something that we have thought about very deeply, because to have a sustainable GTM when you build a developer tool, you need to really understand what is enabling that GTM, right? So I wouldn't agree here completely that it's only because of okay, we need more applications, or there are more users, so we need to build more applications. That has fueled the rise of developer tools as such. I think that was always there. If you look at some of the most successful companies, dev tooling companies or tools, even if we don't talk about companies right now, there are tools, there are projects that started like 10 or 15 years ago, right? So I think the commercial viability of building developer tools, and which is why there is more investor interest today in funding developer tools, especially in India, right? There have not been a lot of developer tooling companies coming out of India. I think the core reason why that has happened is because over the past decade, developers have been more enabled into buying software for themselves. And I think that's one of the core reasons. If you look at 10 years back, and since we have spent a lot of time studying our space, one of the very prime examples here is one of the largest companies, like a couple of large companies in our space, SonarQube and Checkmarks. Both of them have been. Checkmarks is like they had $1 billion exit like a few months back, right? Got bought by a private equity firm, got $1 billion exit. SonarQube has been there in the industry for at least 12 years, completely enterprise focused, and they have like every large enterprise that uses Java or C Sharp and that ecosystem, they use SonarQube. But that is of the yesteryears. If you look at how they sell, and they still sell, but how they sold to these companies, it was, hey, you go to a VP of engineering or you go to the CTO and say that, hey, this is a tool that helps you make sure that you're doing something right. So it's basically a compliance or a regulatory tool, right? But over the past decade, what happened is developers have started to buy software themselves, because now using cloud and people who are building software, now they don't need to have software installed on premise, right? So you have GitHub, right? You don't even need, you can just start using GitHub all by yourselves. And that is, not a developer tool, but Slack, for example, even if it's 1,000 people company, I can start using Slack just for my team without anyone's approval, right? And this small motion, I believe, in the past 10 years, and multiple companies in multiple products utilize this, and which is where it kind of became viable. And connecting back to open source and the question that you asked, how has open source helped? Is open source has fueled this motion very, very beautifully. So think about this. make a product free to use by solo developers. Right? They start using it. And most of these solo developers, if you're focusing on developers, you'll find an amazingly high number of developers who are contributing to open source every day. So you focus on open source, you get a lot of free developers. Any developer who's contributing to open source and they are employed, they are writing private code for some company. Right? So for a developer tooling company, it's very convenient to acquire these free users, right? Completely focusing on the community, giving them all the features for free, and then just helping them see the value. And then since this person is empowered to buy that tool for their small team, you know, all they need to do is just go ahead, add a card, start using the tool, and then figure out, okay, how do I land and expand from there? Right. So I think everything else kept aside, as in, of course, the number of people who are using mobile phones or who are on the internet is increasing. The software complexity is increasing. The number of people who are writing code is increasing. The number of developers who are on GitHub. I mean, if you go and look at GitHub's, they publish a year in review post, right? The number of developers on GitHub, they're almost doubling their number of developers. Like last year, there were like 45 million developers. They added like 10 million more developers in 1 year, right? So the number of people who are writing code is increasing, like, there's no limit to it. And it is a good thing. But that itself is not incentive enough for you to build a developer tooling company, because if you think about it, and just I know I'm going a little bit tangential here, but if you think about Docker, right, the success of success might be I'm not sure if you call it a success, but anyways, Docker as a tool has been widely adopted. But if you think about the technologies that Docker is built upon, those technologies have been there forever. LXCs and C groups, they've been forever, right? Why they built it is because now they had a GTM that was possible due to this, due to all these things that happened over the past decade, that made it viable. And that's true for every successful developer tooling company, that you see.
Got it, Sanket. Like some amazing insights there. I think you particularly mentioned one of my favorite topics in this domain is, the GTM challenges that come with the developer ecosystem, right? Because it is so new, also, right? It is not part of the tried and tested and learned strategies that are available for other software or regular SaaS, right? Maybe we can pick up on that a little more and come back to you, Ankush. You talked about communities, right, being a core part of what you do at Decoder, right? How do you look at GTM, right, as ideas for GTM, ideal ways to get to the developers to use your product, right? Just so throw some light on that through your experiences, please.
Yeah, sure. Uh, I think one is very important that the PLGs, product-led growth, that we have seen. So for example, we've seen Dropbox doing it really, really well in their initial days with their, like, I could refer another user to get more storage, and which worked as a growth hack for them. So we sort of took inspiration for them, utilized a lot of product-led growth in our product. For us, it's you can get more compute resources. So our
Ankush, it'd be great for the audience if you could explain product-led growth. Can you just define product-led growth from your side so that the audience gets that context, and then you can dive into what you think about it?
Yeah, okay. So product-led growth, in my opinion, is something where product itself has hooks and mechanisms built into it, which enables other users to come inside the project, which were not using the product before. So on those contexts, our revenue model is built around pay as you go. So we are seeing a lot of adoption on that also. On subscription side, we are seeing this is the new subscription where you can pay as you go. If you do more, you need to pay more, and you can do it through credits. And how we utilize it is, our product is very complex. It's a platform. It has multiple features built for different segments of users. As I described, we have very different segments, and monetizing it with credits help us allow different monetize different product lines with a common structure. Now, how do we use product-led growth over here is, uh, if a user shares a file on WhatsApp or code on WhatsApp with their friends, they can come back to the app. If I'm creating something, if I'm enabling sharing of it, let's say I can just, after 3 seconds of creating the code or making the code public, I can just show them a pop-up after 3 seconds. Hey, do you want to share it with your friends on WhatsApp? Here the product is coming and pinging you that you should be sharing this, you should be doing this, which is a good behavior. And if that happens, that becomes a positive journey for another users to come into the platform. So that's one way we utilize it. Another way is through referrals. If you refer our product to your friends, which is many companies, I think most of the companies use that, uh, you get more storage, you get more CPU resources, you get more RAM to execute your programs and code. So that also works really well. Now, talking about community. Community, in my opinion, is not just utilized for growth only. It does much more than that. So, say for example, in our context, the education of the platform, you do not need to have a support team or feedback team or founders replying to all the questions. The community itself can help other users. So if the platform itself allows, uh, let's say I'm a coder, or I'm a coder who is building something and I got into an issue, if I can just share it on the platform and ask another community member on how do I solve it, and community comes and helps them out, that's also enable product education, also takes care of that you don't have to educate each and every user on how to use your product. It And the dev tools could be complex. It's through the breadth of services that they provide, through the breadth of features that they provide. Another users coming out and helping them out, it helps a lot. And on the second part, not just education, it also allows contribution. Let's say I'm building something. So another important aspect of community is building on top of shared knowledge base. So what I mean by that is, if you build something and if I don't have to build it again, I can just utilize while I'm building something which, let's say as a module, if I could just utilize what you have built, I wouldn't have to create it again. That's another aspect of community that we are utilizing really well in our product. Uh, so we allow forking of codes in the platform really easily on mobile. It's you don't have to write commands, just a button away. So we see a lot of people forking, building on top of each other's codes. uh, that also becomes an important aspect where community is enabling, contributing to the platform growth inside the platform and outside the platform also, as I gave example of WhatsApp and people sharing through another social media platforms. I think those are some of the examples that comes to my mind when we think about how we achieve growth, uh, staying organic without spending anything on marketing.
Very important points. Lakshman, your thoughts on, how do you get adoption in the early days, particularly, right? You're right at the start of your journey, right? And I'm sure you're thinking about what you're going to do the next few quarters, right? How you going to get the early adopters excited? Where are they? And how do you think about building this early community or ecosystem,
Right.
as some people might say?
Okay. Right. Uh, so I guess uh, it's not exact sciences. I mean, GTM specifically. It's more to do with what you want to achieve, whether you want to chase users or numbers or say some other validations that you want to quickly reach and validate. For us, it's just users and how they use the platform. Um, the way that we look at it is across the different apps that we have on the platform. We look at where these guys hang out. What's happened is that for the last decade or so, there's prime real estate across other applications that has come up, which very few people are looking into. For example, since we're talking about DevTools specifically, uh, the README page of any GitHub repository is prime real estate for marketing. For me, just open Alexa or any of these traffic analyzing websites and go through the popular repositories, the number of views that they get on on a daily basis, and all of these are very highly ranked pages. And so that's one way of uh, sending the message to your user persona. In this case, developer tool. In this case, developers. I look at it from that lens. Uh, Whoever is the user persona, where do they hang out? Uh, Whether there is prime and cheap real estate available to me, right? As opposed to again prime and expensive real estate. And the way that we are looking at spreading the message across is just this. Uh, we'll find out all these prime but cheap real estate where we can talk about the product because this is the GitHub doesn't monetize README pages. Okay? So these are individual contributors to these their own projects, or it could be companies themselves, and reaching out to them is a lot easier than depending on Facebook or Google for paid ads. The other, uh, it's all similar to communities across other channels, say Twitter or subreddit, right? All of this is prime real estate for any dev tooling company to spread the message about the tool in terms of getting feedback or just trying to acquire users from any of these channels. And I've seen through various experiments over the last year itself, there's a disproportionate value in all of these prime real estates when I think about go-to-market. And throughout the last year or so, we've done so many experiments, and we've been pleasantly surprised in the ROI for these prime real estates in terms of user acquisition. So for me, GTM is more to do with looking at where your user persona hangs up, right? And just create a stack rank of prime real estate versus cheap real estate, a 2 by 2 matrix, and see where you can go initially to quickly get the initial number of users. The other thing is, I guess, also at the same time, uh, be prepared for things to go viral, right? Because innately humans are very bad with exponential functions. Now, a lot of these channels will go viral. Okay, there's a good possibility that suddenly will go viral. So I would say be cautious about all of this and have some level of planning if you do go viral in any of these channels. And because the people, like apart from other types of user personas, developers are more critical, and it's better to be careful in your GTM in that way. So that's
Hard
my
to
take on
please?
GTM.
Is there a different way of saying they're hard to please?
Uh, Not hard to please, but I would say uh, hard to show value, right? Because as an eng, you would always think, okay, can I do it better, or can I do it simpler, right? I mean, apart from being critical, there is some level of cynicism that comes into the value in the product itself. But you do need to have very core value that the product gives to the developer, and that should come across through the product and the message itself. So uh, yeah, that's one of the things that we are trying to be very careful about. And yeah,
Got it. Got it. Now, very relevant, I think, interesting points that you bring up about prime but cheap real estate. Where are you going to get it? Right. That's an interesting nugget for sure. Sanket, your early days of adoption and how you were able to get people excited right at the beginning. I remember a couple of years ago when we were talking, and you had shared some very interesting insights there, and also your views on doing this out of India. Any disproportionate challenges? You mentioned you have a cross-border team here and the Valley, right, in the US, right? Any advantages? Any disadvantages? Just your thoughts around that of building such a company out of India. Sanket, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm really bad at this. so, so the early days of growth, which is where what we did initially was, okay. We went through YC, and one of the things that they say is, they don't do things that don't scale, right? And we kind of did that for the first 6 to 8 months of after launching the product. So we were at kind of a disadvantage there because we were trying to build a product in which space, and in that space there have been a lot of companies already who have done something, right? And developers are a skeptical bunch, right? And I say that with all the love because I am a developer myself, and developers are a skeptical bunch because you can't really pull the wool over their eyes very easily, right? Like you can't sway them with a flashy landing page and a very cleverly written copy text, and and they get spun. So we were at a disadvantage because we were trying to build static analysis, a tool that uses static analysis. Now, nobody likes using static analysis tools, right? Like and people are generally fed up. People have been fed up with static analysis in the past, and the general notion was that, hey, these tools don't work. So we had an uphill task. So what we did was we did not try to push the pedal on reaching out to so many people before we knew that, okay, we are able to show the differentiation easily. So for the first 6 to 8 months, we we started doing outreach manually. So we'd figure out, okay, this is where developers hang out, which is GitHub, of course. Deep source was going to be free for open source, so we knew that, okay, the initial set of users, we just want to acquire them for free. And we figured out internally, we have this framework for the product journey. We call it the point of improbable churn, and which is where we want to push the user uh, in the first X days, and for that it is seven days. So through the product itself, we want to push the user to the point of improbable churn, um, which is basically a fancy way of saying that, hey, okay, how do you show the value? So it's kind of an extrapolation of the aha moment. Like, I don't really believe that for aha moment works for all products, because for some products you really need to kind of have a prolonged exposure, right? So what we figured out was we defined our point of improbable churn very early on, that, okay, if we are able to get the user to do these things in the first X days, and for us that was, okay, if we are able to get the user to fix an issue that deep source has raised in the first one day, and get them to make the deep source check mandatory on their code base in the next 3 to 4 days, and get them to enable deep source on a second project in the first 7 to 8 days, then that user will never go away from deep source. And that was our framework, and we internally we call it the point of improbable churn. So what we did was we started reaching out to people, optimizing for them to reach this point manually. So we'd go to and my co-founder and I, we were in SF at the time, and every day we'd go to meetups, and at that time we only supported one programming language, which was Python. And I have been a part of the Python community for a long time, so it was like a known a known field for us, right? So we'd go to meetups every evening. We'd go to developers. If we found out, okay, some influential developer is speaking at this event, we'll go there, make a pull request to their project, and say that, hey, you don't use a static analysis tool today because you think it's messy and it's noisy. We have built a tool that is not. Here's the proof. No marketing BS. Simple. sh- you know, we're just trying to show them the value, right? And after they sign up, we'd keep a check. We'll make pull requests to open source ourselves. Like, if you go and look at my GitHub, like, right, like, you'd see a lot of initial issues that we fixed for them, right? And they would like it, and they liked it, and they saw that, hey, okay, this is how you fix issues. This is how these issues are important, right? And that kind of helped us gain the initial momentum. And the second thing, which is part of the growth, was we recognized where to put our efforts on. So we wouldn't go and try to get a repository which only has like 50 stars to common users. We'd go and we target the Ubers and Slacks and NASA of the world, and the Python Software Foundation. So we aim very high. We were not able to get everyone, of course, because we are a relatively new tool at the time. But whoever, and internally we call that high visibility project. So we just focused on high visibility project. So the first 6 months, it was just me and my co-founder sending pull requests left, right, and center, asking people that, hey, please look at this link. We have found these issues. We have fixed some of these issues for you. If you don't mind, would you try our features? So I think in the initial days, it's very critical for you to manually handhold your first set of power users and show them that, hey, this is what I have built. This is why it's better than what you have seen before. And after we got the first kickstart, we just kind of systemized this thing. So we started hiring people in the team, interns. We started creating a developer outreach team that would do the exact same thing that my co-founder and I used to do. So now we have a team of interns from colleges who are good at open source, who create pull requests, right, to many projects, and do the same thing that we used to do, initially, right? So I think it's very important for if you want to build credibility as a tool in the developer audience, you have to be very organic. You have to be very manual, because if you try to do sales, and trust me, I did try to do sales in the first 3 months of we launched. It doesn't work. Developers don't buy. They don't want to be sold to, right? So I think that's a very important part of GTM. And the second question that you asked about cross border. So I think there isn't anything like cross border anymore. I think the borders have melted or been erased ever since the pandemic. But what we did was we realized what our strengths are. So I have been in the ecosystem for almost 7 years now, and DeepSource is my second startup. My first startup, I kind of failed at my first startup, but what I did succeed was building a network of people that I trust. So what we did was we figured out that, hey, we are really good at hiring. Like, I personally consider myself good at hiring, because in the last startup that I hired, uh, the engineering team that I built were like 18 people. Nobody left. Like, the people who were hired, they stayed until, I left or whatever. So I consider myself like fairly good at hiring. So we said, hey, we'll only build the engineering team in India, because we know how to do this here, and we have enough people that we can trust. So we went out and we hired the first 4 or 5 people in the team that were people who worked with me or who I knew directly, like in my first circle. And then we figured out to do this, and then we started hiring for marketing in the US. So it kind of is, yeah, time zones are a problem, of course, but if you keep things more systematic. So we started investing in more documentation, better processes. We have been doing OKR since very beginning, so we started taking our OKR system more and more seriously, right? So we kind of decentralized how the governance, the decision making of the company, right? And I think that has helped us a lot when it comes to having the team distributed across time zones. Yeah.
Understood. Very relevant point and insightful in terms of what to focus on in the early days. Right, do stuff that doesn't scale. I think the YC mantra. All right, be very methodical about reaching out and repeating these things before it becomes a process. And then, of course, hiring. Maybe I'll use that cue for hiring to come to Ankush. And, thoughts on building a team for such a company, right, which seems so tech heavy. right? Obviously, all three of you here are coders at heart, developers at heart. I can see that the way you talk, and all of you guys have an insight and background. You also think about building the company the same way. Is that a challenge? Is that also something about the time being right in India, right? That enough such developers are available who are ingrained in this ecosystem, and just your experience in terms of building a team for a dev tools company.
Sorry, I was on mute. I think for us, we are a very small team, Arjun. You guys will be amazed. We are just four people, and three of us are in tech. And my co-founder Manish is CPO, who keeps us innovating on the future and what we build next. And basically, mainly three full-time people on tech, and then all of the company utilizes interns really well over here. The pandemic has really helped us hire quality interns in this time. So for us, uh, a lot of we, I would say we manage it really well with the interns, and that's one we at the time we say we haven't achieved product market fit. We say that even though we have these many users, uh, one of the learnings that we have is coding on mobile is still difficult. Nobody wants to write 3,000 lines of code on mobile. Then how do we actually build build on mobile? It's Does it always stay assistive? That's where that's what we are trying to answer at this point with a new mobile first editor, which sort of utilizes open source and modularization of code, uh, and then builds a new paradigm for coding on mobile. It As of now, what we are seeing is all adopted from desktop. The code editor that's on mobile, it's very similar to code editor on desktop, which doesn't work on mobile. I mean, it works, but it doesn't work for longer codes. So that's one of the hypotheses that one of the problem that we are solving at this point. And the way we solve it is we iterate really really fast, and for to do that we utilize interns really well. We do not hire full-time people, and we we sort of modularize what we are building and then build it through interns. And once we have validated our assumptions, then we go and optimize on that. In India, and the thing that we keep hearing about, developers are not properly skilled. If we can go and find, there are still a, a lot of highly talented people in India which can work on complex, how much complex solution you are working. Like I think all of us over here are working on breadth of technical complexity. We're building terminals, code editor, which is done by Microsoft and GitHub. uh, Lakshman themselves are building these IDs running in browser, and other tools, even heaviest tools like Adobe. I think I've seen them, and Sanket also. So but as I think as Sanket's point was, we also see there's huge talent available in India, and there's no need to go out for talent. At least for the technical talent, there's enough resources available in India, and we can utilize them really well. I think on marketing and strategy, we still lack. We Indians still lack a bit. We At least for me, coming out from the college and directly building a startup, that was something I lacked in the start, and I'm still adopting and learning myself on those points. But I think for technical ecosystem, I think it's pretty much there. We can hire well, we can scale well in India. There's no need to go for uh,
That's very heartening to hear, and that makes it super exciting that we'll see many more startups just like yourself in the coming years, right? And that is super exciting for investors like us, right? Lakshman, maybe I'll come to you to talk about maybe changing track and say what is on your wish list of what should happen in this ecosystem over the next few years. is one part of the question. Second part of the question also, to throw some light on what should entrepreneurs thinking of building a dev tools or a dev tools ecosystem related startup, how should they prepare themselves? Any tips in terms of how they could raise money early? They have early believers and raising money. That's part of the ecosystem that everybody here or some of the people in this audience would like to hear from all of you, right? So Lakshman, those 2 points, what wish list for you to what should happen, and raising money ideas to do that better.
One of my wish lists, I mean, which has been there for a while, is standardization in cost of development, right? In terms of or development or whatever value the developer is getting from a particular tool, right? There needs to be standardization on that cost or the price. Earlier, I had mentioned that these days people have started to look at time as a currency and they started to value it. But again, it is subjective. For example, the service that Sanket is giving, say someone is willing to pay $10 a month, others are willing to pay $50 a month. Sanket, as a co-founder or a founder, is on a daily basis looking at how to solve that problem in terms of variable perception of the value in terms of dollars, right? At the end of the day, that's the standard currency. And across the board, it comes across again and again. The cost of development, no doubt there is enough talent, more than enough talent in India, but there is a difference in the cost of development using Indian talent versus, say, someone in the Bay Area, right? Now, if you have two engineers in the same company across two geographies, should you pay them equally, right? For me, yes. Okay, I want to be in a state where I want to pay equally because it's the same amount of job. It doesn't matter because you can argue the same thing within Bangalore itself. Someone might be living someplace in the outskirts and someone in the middle of Bangalore. Okay, cost of living arguments, it doesn't really matter. But there needs to be standardization across the board in terms of the value of different aspects in the developer ecosystem, be it services, be it tools, or be it man hours, right? There needs to be standardization across the spectrum and across geographies. So that's what one of the biggest wish lists, I hope. It's come to a certain degree, right? At least in US, in the top 5 companies, there's fair degree of standardization. But if you look at it across the globe, it's nowhere close to what ideally it
and
should
probably
be.
the remote work
So
from the pandemic will enable this accelerate.
yeah, yeah, it should accelerate. There needs to be a fundamental paradigm shift in the way that we see developers as a human resource, right? Uh, because it's very different compared to other human resources. Um, I mean, again, it is more in terms of reproducibility of the same work, right? And what is the second part of your question?
Maybe some of your learnings and experiences raising early capital, right? Advice to entrepreneurs wanting to build in this space, right? What should they keep in mind when they're going and talking to investors, right, as they start off?
Okay, more. I would say one of my first advices would be to have actually again, it's specifically for DevTools. It's very difficult to know how would you monetize and what would that be, those numbers. Okay, I just spoke about the different perceptions of the costing, right? Someone might be willing to pay $10, others might be, and it's very subjective. It's very early, so that's a very specific case by case situation that all of us would face. I would say do not. There is no exact sciences. If someone says that, yeah, no, your business won't work because nobody will pay, right? It's nothing like that. It's a very subjective thing. As long as we are following first principles in terms of there is value, right? Okay, there's like tangible value. You just need to associate a currency to it, and that's what you have to figure out. And as long as that's there in the product ideology, in the way that we approach user acquisition and our go-to-market, we'll figure it out. But at the same time, yeah, I might be saying that very lightly, even though that's the most important aspect of any business. But I would say be very uh, casual with the feedback you get from others, right? Take it at face value. Do not be saddened with the rejections, because unlike uh, the valley in India, this is a very nascent sector that the big funds have started investing in. So, as opposed to other sectors in India, right? So, be very casual with that approach. Of course, you have to solve for the fundraise in any way possible, but look at all of it from first principles, because the thesis around DevTools in India is still at a very early stage, and anyone saying that they know the playbook, that's incorrect. So a lot of it is also through your personal experiences and expertise. So look at it from that perspective.
Absolutely bang on, and relevant feedback for people like us as well. So thank you for that. Sanket, I think you and I were talking about a week ago, and you've been having interactions with investors and seeing investors here as well and in the valley. Kind of the differences, right? What are your observations? And again, maybe a wish list from the investor side if you want to throw something in there, and your learnings through your process of raising early capital. You're on mute.
Sorry about that again. I mean, Lakshman gave so many hot takes. I'm not sure where to begin about fundraising and developer tools.
Be brutal.
I think a lot of things that he said is kind of true for any segment. If you're any kind of startup that you're building, but especially developer tools. And one of the things that he said is, it's very nascent in India. It's absolutely right. The reason why I say that is, and it's nobody's fault, right? Because there have been very few companies who build for developers out of India. That's the first thing. But the second thing is, you can't look at a developer tool, even if it has, most developer tools have an enterprise-driven business model, like a revenue model. And I'm not talking about GTM at all. Like, you could be, say, for example, a prime example would be HashiCorp, right? Their GTM is completely open source driven. But they're like a $5 billion company. The entire revenue comes from enterprises, right? So the reason why a lot of investors, and please take it with a grain of salt, a lot of investors don't seem to appreciate, and let me put that another way, which could be more, which could be less controversial. So the reason why
more controversial is always good for audience. Go for it.
Yeah. So the reason why I think developer tools founders see a lot of rejection is because it's very difficult. Again, it's very difficult for them to first kind of explain to the investors, okay, how is this going to make money? Because okay, on one hand, that okay, if you are building an open source tool or a developer tool, mostly most of your money is going to be, you're going to make most of your money from large enterprises. That is true for all successful companies in the world today. You look at GitHub, you look at GitLab. GitLab, you know they're doing a lot of things on their cloud pricing, but then most of their revenue, right, comes from large companies, right? You look at newer companies like Sneak, for example, very close to what we do, but Sneak, most of their revenue comes from large companies. So that is going to happen, but when you say this to an investor, it's not, they can't connect it up, they can't extrapolate your success in open source to your success in enterprises, and for good reason, right? Especially in India, I think there have not been a lot of companies in this space. People just haven't seen that success yet. And when you start comparing, and when you tell them that, hey, okay, this is where we are going to make money from. We are going to make money from companies, which means you're a B2B company, right? Now, once you get bucketed into being a B2B company, you start getting, you they'll start comparing you to B2B businesses. And this comparison couldn't be more wrong, because if you try to sell a developer tooling company like a B2B company, you're not going to get anywhere, right? So I think how we kind of and this was this was the crux of our first fundraising experience, when we were trying to raise a small pre-seed back in 2019, early 2019, and we got like so many rejections. Like, I still have that Trello board where we had like 75 investors rejected us. Some of them didn't even, we got ghosted by a lot of investors. There's 75 people. We talked to 75 people. Everyone rejected us. And we were raising like 140K or something. We were raising 300K at the time. So how we did was, and that was my first learning. So how we did was, we didn't focus on explaining to them how we're going to make money at all, right? Because it was difficult for me to, kind of explain to them very, very clearly, right? So we didn't do that at all. Instead, we showed them this is how it's going to change the behavior of some of the best developers in the world. So we went out and we said that, hey, here are developers from Uber, developers from NASA, developers from Slack, developers from Intel, developers from some of the fastest growing startups today, like, except for these large companies. They are using deep source every day for the past 1.5 years. They haven't churned out yet, and they are using it to do something which is very critical to their workload, which is reviewing code. And we were able to showcase, we were able to showcase that, okay, this is how they are extracting value. And since we focused on open source, it was very easy for us to show that. So I still remember, our YC interview. Our YC interview was like 6 minutes long. We talked about, how NASA is using the product, and the partner who was interviewing us, they said that, hey, okay, how? And we said, hey, if you just go to this URL, you'll see one of their pull requests on NASA's GitHub, and you can see how they're using deep source. So it's completely transparent without me having to divulge, okay, how much revenue am I making? How many website signups, visitors do I have? What does my funnel look like? So you skip away all the part and you just tell them that, hey, this is how we are changing a critical behavior of some of the most influential developers of the world. Right. And we had endorsements. We really focused on endorsements from some of the most influential developers in the world. So we had, the most popular graph database in the world using deep source. Right. We had the most popular linting tool for Python using deep source. Right. So then it becomes undeniably evident that, hey, this is something that I should consider. So I think we kind of hacked our fundraising process by not talking about things that we were not good at, to be honest. Like, when we raised our seed round, we were not making a lot of money, right? Because we didn't really focus on revenue. We had a free plan and we had a lot of users. And at that time, we figured out, okay, what is the most prominent indicator or most undeniable indicator of my success? And you might argue, even revenue is not undeniable if you think about it. There are a lot of companies who say that, okay, this is recurring revenue, and then that goes away because of, okay, this is not very sustainable, right? And there are a lot of these things which are deniable, but then what is undeniable, is user retention, right? For a longer time, like for 1 year, and that you can't deny that. Okay, tomorrow if we mess up royally, like if we do a colossal mess up in the product, of course these people will go away. But then we're not going to do that because we're a sensible company, at least. I should hope so. So I think that has been the crux of my experience. So I think the only advice that I'd give is, if you are raising money for a developer tooling company, be it in the US or in India, especially in the US, it's much easier because investors there have seen a lot of these successes. They have seen this playbook happening, so they don't need you to explicitly explain the vision. But even if you're doing it in India or the US, I think as a founder, you really need to understand your own product first. You really need to nail down, this is why people are using my product. Go find success stories. Go find 10 success stories, and that's it. Put it on a deck, and you're done. So,
No,
yeah,
amazing. I think some
lot,
very
yeah.
specific insights. Thanks for that, and thanks for sharing. Right, we are beyond the hour mark. We'll start taking some questions from the audience that's out there. I think a couple of you spoke about how you guys think about talent and how you have hired. Right, maybe if you can throw some more light, given basically the question goes, with the influx of high-paying startups and companies from all over the world in a city like Bangalore, cost of engineering talent is rising year by year. How hard is it for startups to attract talent, right? Each of your experiences, Ankush, I know you mentioned you've relied heavily on interns, right? Is it because it is too expensive to hire regular developers? And for small startups, just a quick point on that.
I think yeah, it's that thing in Bangalore. If you pay someone something, there is always another company which can pay more to the same person. And developers are really, I mean, they don't have I mean, they think by salary as one of the most important point, and they do not need to care about where are they work. I mean, most of them, not all of them, but they wouldn't think about what kind of work I'm going to get to done, what impact it can have. As a founder, it's our job to show the other picture also, but it's always very troublesome for us also to keep attracting new talent. And and that's why we choose the intern path which work for us. There are very powerful. I mean, I started building in college. Most people start in college itself, and and if there are these people already exist which started building in college, you can get them on a lower cost, and you can still iterate faster until at least until you have the product market fit, where the quality, that this might not be the same quality product that you would expect from but you can validate quickly, but you can find product market fit quickly. There are pros to having one strategy over another. So I think we fill this gap with interns because we cannot afford that many new engineers in this highly, as Himanshu suggested, a highly paying startup ecosystem. So that works for us. I think you can try that out if that works for you. uh, Only thing that we have seen working, let's say, uh, to make things work, you always need to know things yourself. By that I mean, if let's say you get an Android developer and you in your team do not have an Android developer, you cannot get anything out of him, even if there is an Android intern. You need to know what needs to be get done, and then it can be done. So that's just the important point. So if it's a non-tech founder trying to build a company with interns, that's really tough. That's not going to happen, I think. But
Understood.
if it
Ankush is, I think, breaking up. Ankush, your network is breaking up a little bit.
that
Hey, Ankush, your network is a little flaky. I'll back to you later, right? Lakshman, your early thoughts on team building, hiring challenges, right? You've also just raised a seed round, but I'm sure you understand the competitive nature of what remuneration is in the ecosystem and how that is a challenge for you. Sanket, I'll come to you because you've already built a fair size team. So, and you did touch upon something. I'll come to you last. Lakshman, your thoughts before that.
I guess uh, in terms of compensation, I won't say that. See, because us in a different role, say a role which we're just working for someone, we would be the ones who would say that we're not being paid enough. So I won't say that startups are paying inordinate sums of money to engineers in Bangalore these days. But yeah, I'm happy that there's startups who started paying a high amount of compensation uh, to engineers, I mean, relatively junior as well. For us, I agree with most of the points Ankush has mentioned. Interns have given us a disproportionate value over the last year or so. Like, it, I guess the amount of time that you spend with these interns in training them in the kind of work that you want, uh, that goes a long way. For example, we 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 got two interns early last year. Um, Initially, I spent a lot of time, my time. Again, that's a currency. You pay with your you pay with your time. That's a currency, right? So if you can't pay cash, pay with your currency, which is time. And I train them, and within like 4 to 5 months, every day, me working with them, they started writing really good code. For example, these guys were still in their final year, and these guys were writing, I could say, 1 or 2 years experience software engineering role code, right? In terms of code quality, and I was pleasantly surprised because uh, I didn't expect returns to this extent, but when I look back, it was how I got the work done in terms of spending my time as opposed to cash. And yeah, the other aspect about knowing everything, yeah, that's completely true. Several times I just pick a book or open the documentation, spend hours, read. If I don't have general expertise in a particular field which I'm trying to implement, or tech that I'm trying to implement, I just have to do it myself. And the more you do, the better you get at it. And all of that has disproportionate value because later on, when you go to the market in terms of hiring, you have that breadth, right? You know everything that ha- basically happens across the spectrum in your tech stack. So that's that. I when going back to the first point, yeah, it's the founder's job to keep cash in the bank, right? If market forces say that a particular type of share, okay, you're getting for a particular price point, then as a founder, it's your job to get that money in the bank and or further. If you don't, okay, then your other currency is time. Okay, use that and solve it any way you can. So that would be my take on the salary compensation in Bangalore startups.
Got it. Got it. Sanket, your experience, you built a certain size team and you have a history of building teams and keeping them, right? What can you elaborate on, right? What works? What works? What not to do, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I'd like to address is the cost part and paying people. I think there's an old saying, right? You know, I mean, uh, in general, you know, smart people know how much their time is worth. If you want smart people to work at your company, uh, they would know how much they'd be getting paid at other companies, right? So you can't, outsmart smart people. Like, you don't want to outsmart smart people because, if you're hiring someone who's not smart enough to understand that they're worth more, then probably you shouldn't be hiring them. Like, I personally don't want to hire people who are not as smart as me, at least. Like, I want to be the dumbest person in the company, right? Especially developers, right? So if you're hiring people who are smart, right, then they would know that they would be getting paid more. So you will end up paying them more. And as an employee, unless you have equity in the company, and even if equity at that, right, unless you have considerable equity at the company in the company, you don't you should not expect, as a founder, you should not expect them to kind of take a pay cut given you have cash in the bank, take a pay cut just because you believe in the mission. I mean, I think that's unethical on the founder's part as well. If you can afford to pay them, you should pay them, right? If you can't afford to pay them, then you should just, make more money and then afford to pay them. So I think, since, of course, the market has the average salary of a developer of a certain, any technology stack, that has increased for sure, fueled by a lot of other companies who can afford to pay people more, so they do pay people more, and they can attract, like, people who are, really really smart. But that's only one part of the story. And to be honest, that has been there for a long time. Like, Microsoft and Amazon and Google, they didn't come to India in the last 5 years. Like, they have been in India and they have been paying, you know, top of the market ever since they have been in India, right? Like, an Indian startup like Flipkarts of the world, right? They haven't been here only for like the past 5 years. They have been there for a longer time. So it is not something new that, people are getting paid more. And I think it's fair. Now, how to beat that into hiring good developers is to do your job as a founder well. As a, and I think as a founder, your most important job is hiring. And hiring is basically selling. You need to sell your vision to to someone. And if you are able to do that well, there are people who are willing to take a bet on you if you are able to give them, even if you're not matching what Google pays them or Microsoft pays them, even if you're able to pay them decently, and if they believe in your mission, as long as you're not taking advantage of them by asking them to believe in your mission and not paying them on that note, right? You would find people who want to join the company. So what I did was, personally, and even at Deep Source, what we did was, one, hiring for us was a little complicated because we're building static analysis tools. There are very few companies in the world who are building static analysis tools. So if we wanted people who really liked doing this, and once you restrict yourself like that, right? Yes, your total addressable market in terms of hiring, that shrinks, but it also restricts to only those people who genuinely want to do this. So we have been able to hire people who really want to work on programming languages, build tools for programming languages, write parsers from scratch, write ASTs from scratch, like AST parsers from scratch, because they wanted to do it. And they said no to something that we definitely couldn't afford, to something that we could afford and which is comfortable, right? And that's pretty much about it. And just be honest when you're hiring. Like, say, if you can afford to hire people, and if you can pay them well, then pay them well. If you can't, then don't hire them. And you have to then, make do with, people who are not as good, I think. And I think as an early stage startup, equity also plays a large part. So we have been very generous with equity. Like, all our initial first 5 or 6 team members have something between 0.5 to 1% of equity in the company, and these are the people that we really trust, right? And if you're able to find a group of people that you can really trust, then it is worth paying them, like giving them 0.5% equity. It is worth paying them more than what you are taking for yourself, right? And again, and to the last point about interns, yes, of course, we have had great success with interns as well. Like, but interns as a full-time product strategy, engineering strategy, doesn't really work for the long term, because you need people who can commit to your company, and who can commit to your company full time, right? So while so what we do is, of course, we hire interns, but we hire interns to make them full time as soon as possible if we see promise, right? If you're building for the long term, and it depends on what kind of company that you want to build. If you're building for the long term, you need to have people who think long term. And people who are in college, they still have a lot to figure out, right? You can't expect them to give commit to you for 4 years. And this is something that I strongly believe is, I'm very reluctant. Like, this is one of the things I optimize for when hiring is, we try to see if this person who is hiring, who we are hiring, they can stay in the company for at least 2 years, right? And you simply can't expect an intern to give you that kind of a, you know. So a lot of
Got it.
kind of
Very
information.
valuable. I think 2 or 3 takeaways from my side based on what you guys have said. Right, interns very valuable to accelerate certain things and to fill the gap. Right, also hire young right out of college, give them your time, train them, and help them add value, and so that they are with you for the long haul. Right, and be generous with your time, your attention, and your equity. Right, and that's how you build great teams for the long haul. Right, great takeaways there. Right, there's one more question. I think we're coming close to the full time here, but one more question, right? Says, what are some of the best threads on DevTools? I'm going to expand on that and ask each of you a quick couple of minutes, talk about, where should somebody go to get inspired, to learn about DevTools, what's happening in this ecosystem, what are your go-to sources of knowledge, information, as well as companies that you guys look up to and where you guys take inspiration to build your own startup as well, right? A mix of things, right? Where do you go online to learn more about DevTools / the broader ecosystem? Where's the water cooler of sorts, right? And what companies do each of you aspire to or get inspired by when you are building your own startups as founders, right? Sanket, we'll start off with you itself, right? Quick, 1 or 2 minutes.
Yeah. So there are a bunch of, there's no, I don't think there's a structured, de facto place where founders come together and talk developer tools. Most of this happens in private groups on WhatsApp, Telegram. I think I'm part of a bunch of those groups, but most of the chat happens there. But in terms of resources, in terms of where you can hang out, Hacker News is something that you can, that Hacker News is where one of the places where you get brutal feedback from developers. It's sometimes it can be overwhelming, but if you hang out there, you will actually see very valuable feedback on things that you could be building, or your competitors or your product, right? So one is that, and second, in terms of resources, I follow a bunch of newsletters about from people who write about specifically dev tools. I kind of started writing things on my own blog. I didn't get time, but one of the newsletters that I particularly like is by Tomas from Redpoint. He talks about dev tooling a lot, and he has some great insights. And there are a couple of other VCs who have done a very deep, deep down dive into dev tools. In the US, there is Innovation Endeavors from by Eric Smith. They have they have invested in a lot of dev tools, and they have a newsletter as well, I guess. And ideally, you would want to follow some of these people who have seen developer tooling companies or invested in them for a long time and seen some success. Some of these people have great insights that you can pick up, especially in terms of GTM, especially in terms of product-led growth. But to be honest, this is one of the things that is missing in this ecosystem. We don't have a consolidated place where you can go and learn. Okay, how do I build a dev tooling company, right? But things like Hacker News and indie hackers, for example, it's a good place to hang out.
Got it. Ankush, thoughts? Welcome back from the break. But your
Thanks,
thoughts?
sorry, I got some internet
No
issue,
problem.
and I'm going to keep my video off right
Go
now.
ahead. Go ahead.
I think I would agree with Sanket. Hacker News is one of the best places where developers hang out together and share knowledge. And for us, I think xdadevelopers.com worked really well also. It's not specifically where all the developers hang out, but something where Android developers shares what they are building. So I shared first version of Decoder over there, and we got all the traction that we had, initial traction from there only, because then XDA developers themselves featured us alongside with Prisma, which got us, I think, initially 500 to 1,000 downloads daily. We start getting just after the release, which doesn't really happen usually, right?
Got it. Absolutely. Lakshman?
Yeah, I guess again, Hacker News, Product Hunt, a couple of subreddits specific to dev tools or say programming languages in general. The other, I would say, GitHub/trending. Yeah, that's a very interesting place to see what trends on GitHub in terms of open source repositories, because a lot of tools that I see, either say closed source or like private company facing tools, have similar ideas that were on GitHub/trending at some point in time. So GitHub/trending is a good place. Hacker News, Product Hunt, and a bunch of subreddits. Of course, there are a couple of good Twitter handles to follow. Again, the discovery of those would also be through subreddits or Hacker News.
Got it. Lovely. This is very, very useful, guys. We're at the top of 1 hour 30 minutes. So I'll take this opportunity to thank all of you for your valuable time and sharing your insights. Very, very valuable, very helpful to the community at large. I'm sure a bunch of entrepreneurs have been inspired today who will follow on your trajectory, right? So Lakshman, Ankush, and Sanket, thank you so much for your time, and we wish all three of you the very best for the success of your companies and to lead the way into developer tools being built out of India, right? Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate this. A shout out for the audience. Thanks for being with us this Monday evening. Right, just look at the live chat. All these companies are hiring and building great products. If anybody's excited by what you've heard and the kind of people you've seen today, please reach out to them. They're available on, I'm assuming, Twitter, LinkedIn. They can, please reach out to these guys, right? And once again, from SpecialeTalks and Speciale Invest, thank you very much for joining us.